Um, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Beverly. I am the social media director at Covington, and you'll see some other faces that you recognize. And by the end of the hour, we'll all be buddies. Uh, so I'm very pleased to introduce our friends from Big Five. Since 1973, Big Five Tours and Expeditions has been creating just amazing vacations experiences to 44 different destinations. They really have sustainable travel at their heart. And so they create programs in partnership with the communities that they visit because they actually walk the talk of caring for people, the local people, protecting nature, and promoting, the cultural diversity. They have won the Virtuoso Travel Sustainable Tourism Leadership Award 2 times, which is just amazing. We are so fortunate to have three people from Big Five join us today. And they just know Africa inside and out. So this is going to be just a conversation. They're going to tell us good stuff, and we're going to ask questions, and we'll share our good stuff, and it will just be fun. So Ashish is, where does Ashish go?
I'm right
there
here.
He is. He is the president of Big Five. And I think you all will know that after today, he is a very hands-on leader, and he takes a personal interest in every booking. So Ashish is your buddy and your just a wonderful resource to know at Big Five. And then also joining us is Aziz. And you'll wave, Aziz. There you are.
Hi, everyone.
He is, Ashish gives them all kinds of titles, but he's the big boss of Tanzania. He handles all the operations of the Tanzania safaris and everything going on for Big Five there. And then we also have Paul up in the corner. And there's Paul, and Carol is also with, Carol, did I lose? There she is. Carol is also with Big Five. So welcome to you guys, and we are just honored to have you all spend some time with us and talk about Africa.
Thanks so much.
So Aziz, you want to kick us off and tell us a little bit about Big Five?
Yeah, I think, we can jump right in, and Aziz, actually, everything I learned is from him. I got to tell you. So he really is the master behind it in terms of it. So Aziz, why don't we tell these people about what Safari with Big Five is about? Tell us about maybe some crazy things, and then we'll jump into a few things. We'll address the elephant in the room, get it out of the way, and then we'll jump right in. So Aziz, you want to start us off?
Hi, everyone. Good evening or good afternoon, wherever you are. I think we'll do the elephant. Just to let you know that we in Tanzania are ready and waiting for you. Whenever you're ready to travel, then we're waiting with open arms. We might not hug straight away, but we are waiting with open arms to welcome you to our gorgeous country and continent, actually, and show you around and share it with you. It's people, wildlife, culture, history. There is so much that we have to offer. We've got some SOPs, which are standard operating procedures. These have already been put in place. There's a lot of training going on for the tourism industry to prep us even better for your imminent arrival.
Yeah, and I think the what's really great about how we approach these things is everything taking into account and not rushing anybody and saying when you're ready, but we have everything ready. We have our own vehicles in Tanzania, we have our own vehicles in Kenya, and being able to explain that this is what Safari is about. This is the experience that's waiting for you. And so the elephant in the room was just that, is just that the country is ready. There's actually a really great protocol. Aziz, can we just talk about what Tanzania's protocol is, what they're doing for arrivals, because they don't have a quarantine, but they have something else in place, if you want to just talk about that.
Yeah, the government lifted the 14-day compulsory quarantine. That's pretty much about 2-3 weeks ago. The tourism industry, meaning any personnel who is coming into contact with guests who are coming to visit our country, are all pre-tested like a week before. And then they go into a kind of self-quarantine, so they're not meeting with others to ensure that they're free of any infection. But it starts at the airport. It starts with your immigration officials, your customs officials, and then of course your guide and all the hotel, camp and lodge staff. So everyone's most of us will be wearing masks, wearing gloves initially. This will, hopefully all change, and we will not have to wear all of that. It'll just be bygone days. But for the moment, we're all ready. Everything is sanitized. The sanitizers in the vehicle. We have masks in the vehicle if you don't have your own. Most people would probably come with their own. But yes, I mean, we are taking every precaution to ensure that you come in and not have to worry about anything. Rather, as usual, business as usual, come into the country and we'll take care of you from the moment you arrive.
Absolutely. And Kenya actually just yesterday announced their arrival process is the exact same. Everybody working in tourism has to be tested every 2 weeks and be in a 14-day quarantine before coming into contact with anybody on arrival. Within our office, before any documents leave to come out to you, everything is passed through a UV disinfectant light before it's put into the shipping box and then shipped out to you. So whatever comes inside the box, which is in a waterproof envelope, it's all been disinfected before it comes to you. So you have that process as well in terms of it. And then in general, in terms of, the various borders, South Africa, there's a lot of misinformation out there in terms of when South Africa is supposed to open. Some people said February. Realistically, it's probably going to be September that the border opens for international travel. They'll get their SOP in place then, but it's likely going to be October, November. So you're starting to see blocks of countries coming up. And the way Southern Africa works is Namibia, Botswana, Zambia, Zimbabwe, all these countries, they pretty much do what South Africa does. So when South Africa says they're open, the other countries are going to follow suit, because pretty much anybody who comes to South Africa is not going to go to just South Africa. They're going to go to Southern Africa, and they'll go to other countries around as well. So that's part of it as well. In terms of the experiences, and this is what we're going to share some stories with you today, some really cool pictures as we go through. Aziz and I have been on safari, me since I was 4 years old, him even younger, obviously. And as I mentioned to you, I learned almost everything from him. So as we go through, we'll be able to show you. He's the only man, I got to tell you, he's the only man that actually has made it from Las Vegas to Arizona to the Grand Canyon and back on the same day. I won't say how fast he was going, but the fact that he did it in one day says something, because he was under the gun to do it. In addition to that, if the vehicle has 4 wheels, he can drive it. No matter where it needs to go, he can put it there. And
also 3.
Also 3 wheels. That's right. He can put it there, and we got some cool stories, everything about that as well. So everything we do is completely, and what we've done with the team at Covington is everything is completely custom, meaning it's all, you're never in a large group. Everything is completely there. The joke we have with Aziz and in the office is we've been social distancing for 15 years. So we're kind of wondering what took everybody so long, in terms of it. So that part is definitely there. So Aziz, why don't we tell these people just what's the craziest thing that you've done on safari? I'll share mine, but I know you've got a killer story. And before you jump in, I got to share with everybody that this is a man that when I call modern day Bear Grylls, if there is a rodent on the side of the road or a bug on the side of the road, before anybody figures out whether it'll bite him or not, Aziz gets out, picks it up on the head and says, "Oh, look here." And then afterwards looks at his hand and goes, "Oh, look, it bit me." So Aziz, you want to talk about your craziest story, and then we'll jump in from there.
Thanks, Ashish. I wouldn't say it's crazy. I'll just say we're calling it a close encounter, and it wasn't even my close encounter. It was actually my daughter. We were out there in summer, and we did a little safari to Tarangire National Park, not too far from Arusha, and had gone in for a couple of nights into the park. Of course, I was sitting up front driving, and we had stopped to watch some elephants, gorgeous herd of elephants, and that's what Tarangire is known for. And I was up in the front eating a tangerine, peeling my tangerine and eating it, while the rest of the family were up in the roof hatch, videoing and taking pictures and just watching this gorgeous herd of elephant. And then all of a sudden we had this one single female who, quite old, I'm not sure if she was the matriarch, I don't think she was, and she slowly ambled towards the vehicle. And I was like, oh, this is going to be fun. She's going to walk right by the vehicle. But the thing is that she had smelt the tangerine peel, and for her, I know it's a delicacy. So she had from quite a distance, smelt it. Now I'm in the front eating my tangerine, watching my kids in the back taking photographs and videos, and all of a sudden, this elephant sticks its trunk into the roof hatch and literally is breathing through the trunk into my daughter's face. I mean, she could barely video it with her phone. She was not using a camera, she was using a phone. And I just like, that is such a magical experience. It was almost like, we've done it. You know, we've started this game drive. We've been out for about 10 minutes. And this is our experience. I mean, we could pack it in, and this is a lifetime memory, especially
Can't
for
top
her.
that.
I mean, you know, I've had several, but I was just thinking about, you know, this is a young 16-year-old who's used to living in a city, and then to be this close to nature and realize how small we are. It was quite an experience, and that's what safari is. It's not a vacation. It's an emotion. It really is. There's so much to experience in sights and sounds and smells and languages and foods. It's completely a heartfelt experience.
And you know, each of us had this, and it seems like it happens every time in our teens, right? So I remember I was 14. I climbed Kilimanjaro at 14, and I remember when I came back to Kenya, Aziz, I think you were already in Tanzania, right? No, you were still in Kenya before when I climbed. So I came back, he saw me, and I had dropped 20 pounds in a week climbing Kilimanjaro. And Aziz looks at me and he goes, "You look like Mowgli from Jungle Book. What happened to you?" And basically started out from there. But then you start going into these things. So I put a picture of our vehicles up there, and not to showcase the vehicles, but to illustrate the point that Aziz is talking about with the tangerine. So something similar happened when I was 19. I was actually leading my first trip through Tanzania. I borrowed Aziz's camera. I was all excited. You know, it was like, okay, I'm in college, but I'm going to go do this. So we're out in the Serengeti looking at game, and that back axle you see back here, and this is where the conservation aspect comes in. And this is something very, very important, right? So you're going to think I'm crazy for saying this, but we stop, we're looking at this wildlife, and all of a sudden in the grass, we just see a part. And we go, what's that? And that part's coming towards the vehicle. And we can't quite see what it is. And all of a sudden it turns out to be something that goes under the vehicle and doesn't come out the other side. I said, okay, well, that's a problem. And so at the time, Richard, who was the driver, looks down, comes up, and face is kind of white. And I go, well, that's not a good sign. And he goes, there's a cobra wrapped up in the back axle. It's warming up on the rear differential. Now you can't, you know, first thing you do is drive off. Of course, no. But as a conservation company, everything counts. So we waited for an hour and a half. We waited for this cobra to warm up, unwind, come out this side. And this thing was huge, but I got to tell you, it was gorgeous, just into what it looked like. Now, I wasn't about to go get close to it to go look at it at all. But the fact that it was there, and then everything else, the same vehicle, I was actually in Kenya, recent trip, and you know, one of the things I've never seen in my entire life, and I told Aziz about this, I've never seen a hyena hunt from scratch. I've always seen them scavenge. So it rained, and Aziz, you were telling me, and I'm going to have you talk about this. When it rains, the hyenas actually hunt. They don't go scavenge; they hunt for themselves, right? When the ground gets softer. Can you talk about that a bit, and then I'm going to tell this story.
I was spotted hyena. I mean, we all think, I mean, the little or the lot that people know about wildlife, we all think of hyenas, and that's always been age-old theory that hyenas are scavengers, when in fact, actually, because you'll find them, you'll come out early in the morning, you're on your early morning game drive, sun's coming up, there's a pride of lions sitting with a zebra carcass and eating away, and on the periphery, you have this whole pack of hyena yelping away and hooting away. And you're like, oh, scavengers, waiting for the, you know, leftovers. But in actual fact, what actually happens more often than not is the hyenas actually go and make a kill. And it's the lions who actually steal and scavenge the kill off the hyena. But we all look at the hyena as a scavenger. Oh, he's a scruffy looking animal, quite endearing, but an incredible hunter, especially when they get together in a pack. And that's not a hyena.
No, it's not. I put this up because this is usually the food for the hyena. Okay. Yeah, I thought we could get away with calling this a striped hyena, so, but I guess not. So this is the thing. So we actually, in those vehicles I showed you earlier, we actually saw these hyena, and it was on the way to the airstrip. And this is the thing about safari is you never know when you're going to see something, right? It could be 1 o'clock in the morning when you're sleeping and you hear something, or in my case, on the way to the airstrip. And all of a sudden, this wildebeest is there, and these hyenas are circling them. And for the first time, I got to see a hyena hunt from scratch, and exactly what Aziz said just happened. The hyenas hunted, and then they were fighting over the kill. And while they were fighting over whose kill it was, the lions came in. And it was absolutely amazing in terms of that experience. And it was a zebra that they had actually gone after. And this is why I put this picture up in terms of the experience. It's very different from Southern Africa, right? So when people talk about this, Aziz, let's talk about this for everybody in terms of the difference between Tanzania and the type of people in Tanzania, the types of wildlife in Tanzania and in East Africa versus in Southern Africa, and what that's about, the contrast. Do you want to talk? Let's I'll have you start off and give your thoughts on that.
I'm brought up in Kenya, and I moved to Tanzania, and I think one of the reasons why I was just smitten by the people. Tanzanians are incredibly friendly and warm, and very genuinely so. So that was the draw for me, besides just the parks and the animals. It was first the people. And I'm not talking about the people out in the villages. I'm talking about the people even in the cities. So that was my first draw to Tanzania, and took me across the border from Kenya. So we have these wonderful people, and then we've got this incredible, crazy array of offerings, from gorgeous white sandy beaches on the island of Zanzibar to the highest freestanding mountain in the world, and everything else that fits in between. So really, if you go out in a safari, even if you go out in a regular 10-night safari and you do the northern part of Tanzania, and you're out there doing about 4 or 5 different parks, you always think, okay, when you think of Africa, everyone's imagination is like open plains, couple of acacia trees, giraffes or elephants walking by. But then when you actually go out and experience a safari and realize that the topography and the vegetation differs so much, now that's a lovely detour by the very wonderful pilot of Precision Air on my way to Dar es Salaam, and then he took us over the top of Kilimanjaro. So that's the peak Kibo. So I mean, this is Africa. I mean, that's Tanzania, and it's like this throughout Africa. It's not just Tanzania. It's like this in Kenya. It's like this in Southern Africa, and I think that's the big attraction and the big draw about Africa. It's the variety. It's the people. It's the cultures, and of course the incredible amount of wildlife and bird life. Most people come out in safari thinking, oh, we want to see the lion, we want to see the big 5, photograph them and move on. And we always, I mean, the guides are always trying really hard. I'm always like, point out the small things, point out the bugs, point out the butterfly, point out the birds, because we have, well over 1,000, 1,200 species, with at least 50 which are endemic just to Tanzania. So I'm like, people are like, oh, we're not interested in birds, because, the guides are always kind of like trying to get to know the guests and see what they're really into. Most people are not bird fanatics, but honestly, after spending a week on safari, we'll have changed that. And you'll probably get home and start looking out for birds too.
Well, and I want
Aziz, where is the where's the big flamingo lake? Is that Tanzania?
That is we have a lake called Lake Natron.
Yes.
And that's actually the breeding lake for flamingos, for most of the flamingos of eastern southern Africa. So they all converge there, and that's where they build their nest, and that's where they lay their eggs and hatch them, and then move on and scatter again into all the various alkaline lakes of the Great Rift Valley. And the Great Rift Valley is stretching all the way from Syria down to Mozambique. So it's got quite a number of alkaline lakes, and then they're all spread out. But for a period of time, they come in, and that's where they do all the breeding. That was a bit of a problem a while ago because the government in Tanzania had wanted to start mining soda, which is from alkaline lakes, and they were going to do it in Lake Natron. But we fought tooth and nail and stopped that entire project from happening. So that area remains protected.
I was actually going to share with everybody that, with Lake Natron, and I want to stop for a second and ask people here about a story of Africa, if you've been, what your story is. But as we're doing it, I want to put a picture up of Lake Natron, because when Aziz talks about the alkaline lakes, this lake is blood red. The water, it is quite amazing. So I'm going to pause for a second. If anybody has any kind of stories that you have because you've been to Africa, please, I'd love for you to have you share it, because this is a very open conversation.
I did go to Africa quite a few years ago, maybe 10 years ago. I was in Kenya, and it was just an amazing, life-changing trip on its own. But one thing that made it just really special was that I traveled with my dad. It was just my dad and me. My mom actually came to Virginia and took care of my 3 kids at the time, so my dad and I could go travel. And it was just, it was just an amazing trip for bonding, for family, for us to have together. It's just been a wonderful memory, and something that just, makes my heart warm every time I think about it. And we talk about it together a lot still. He's still around, and they live in Kentucky. And it was just such a fantastic opportunity to travel with my dad like that.
I wanted to share this picture of the flamingos because I think it helps prove the point from Lake Natron. This is what Aziz was talking about. And much of these stories, this is what you were saying as well, in terms of it. This is where we all, it's a bonding experience, because it's not, you literally have no televisions. So you can't distract yourself. You either have to read or talk. So it's the best form of marriage therapy. It's the best form of child therapy. It's the best form of bonding there is. You're forced to discuss no matter what comes out.
So that's the thing you talk about family on safari, and a lot of people are sorry, a lot of people are concerned about, can take the kids out in safari. It's quite a lot of money to pay and drag them all the way to Africa, and they're probably going to sit in the back on one of those games, or their phones, and scrolling through Instagram or whatever, or make lots of noise when we're trying to keep quiet in the game drive. But it's quite the contrary. To have children on safari, and then I'm talking about kids who are coming out from the States, who've never been to a wilderness area or a national park, are not really into being on safari. It's probably mum and dad who've kind of dragged them all the way out to Africa. You put them in the back of a Jeep. I mean, the first thing that happens is that they immediately, and the guides love kids. I think the whole of Africa, we have, we're very, very, have a very soft spot for children. So your driver guide, who will probably be with you for your entire trip, is immediately bonding with the kids, teaching them a bit of Swahili, teaching them the local handshake, and sharing just stories about his own family and his own kids. So straight off the bat, the kids are enthralled. But when you go on that game drive, you think, oh God, this is going to be a bit difficult. We wake up the kids at 5:30, 5:45, give them a glass of juice and some cereal, throw them in a vehicle and bounce them around from 6:30 a.m. till lunchtime, when we stop for a gorgeous picnic lunch. How are they going to make that? It's, putting a child in the back of a vehicle for 6 hours. And will they be noisy? But the minute you hit the road, I mean, they're silent completely. It's the adults that we have to shush. They're the ones who are loud and always talking. The kids are almost in the back, mom and dad, shush, we're on a game drive. And they've got binoculars, they're out there spotting, and they're completely enthralled by what they're seeing. And I think it's also got to do with when you're out in safari and you're in the middle of the Serengeti and you turn off the vehicle and you're the only vehicle in the area. That's another thing we do, is that the guides are always, it's not a guaranteed 100% that we'll manage, but we always make a huge effort to avoid the more high density areas. There are high density areas in parks. It's kind of hard to think that this is wildlife. They're free to roam. They can move in and out of areas as they so wish. But there are certain areas where there's permanent water or a river or a spring, and those areas will always have wildlife throughout the year. So that's an easy area to spot wildlife, but that becomes then a high density area for game viewing. And we try and avoid that. That's almost a certainty to see animals, but it's almost a certainty to bump into other vehicles. So we try and avoid those areas and go a little bit off the beaten track. It means a lot more work for our guides, but they're only too happy to do it because they know what it means. So you'll end up with, even if it's a herd of zebra or a herd of elephant, or it's a solitary male lion, and then you turn off the vehicle and you're standing there in the roof hatch, taking pictures in complete silence, listening to the wind, smelling the Serengeti. And you realize as an adult or as a human being, how small we are and how almost insignificant. You know, we always have all these problems in our lives that kind of take over everything. And I think being on safari it is a sort of therapy, and kind of puts our lives and our, human race existence into perspective. So for a child, even more so, because you're even smaller, and this is even much grander and larger than life almost. And so, kids on safari are fabulous, and will have memories forever. It doesn't matter what age. I mean, I've taken my kids on safari since they're 2-3 years old, and they can still recount experiences from that age. And it's one of those things that just sticks with you.
Well, and there's a question here that talks about, the difference between Kruger and safari there, because it also applies to, as you said, to adults. And it's a very different experience. And I'm going to pop in a picture of the migration. And I know, Paul, you've got something you want to share as well. I'm going to come to you in a second. Aziz, can we talk about the difference in terms of type of game that you're going to see in, let's say, Kruger National Park versus a Botswana in the Okavango Delta versus, say, the Serengeti during migration? If we could take all three and talk about those different experiences.
I mean, we have certain species which are only found in Southern Africa. We also have certain species which are only found in Eastern Africa. I think it's maybe in Southern Africa you would probably see a lot more game much quicker because the areas tend to be smaller. So if you're in a mad rush safari, yes, absolutely. And if you've experienced East Africa, then I would definitely say, yes, please go to Southern Africa. It's amazing, all of it. South Africa, Botswana, Namibia, Mozambique, Malawi, they all got so much to offer. But I think, and I probably got a little bit of a bias towards Tanzania, but when a country that's almost 1 million square kilometers in size sets aside about 30 to 35% of its country to wildlife conservation or wildlife areas or wildlife management areas or national parks, it just goes to show you how big. I mean, we've got parks which are bigger than Switzerland in southern Tanzania. That's bigger than a European country, set aside just for nature, just for wildlife to roam freely and for you to experience.
Yeah, and I would add to that just the fact that, I think, Aziz, you've said it perfectly. So if you were to take apart the three core areas, so the density of wildlife in East Africa is, of course, the migration, and I'll pop up a picture of that to see what that's like, and we'll talk about that in a second as well. And then in Southern Africa, within, let's say, Sabi Sands, which is the private concessions near Kruger National Park, it's smaller parcels of land, more concentrated. So, for example, if you're in Tanzania, maybe it's a bit harder to see rhino in the wild, but in Kruger, there's black rhino in these concessions to see. It's probably going to be a bit easier to see a leopard in Kruger, in Sabi Sands area, for example, versus, let's say, open plains where it's easier to see a cheetah. And then the species that we're talking about, black maned lion in Southern Africa versus the pride lion or the lion you see in East Africa. And then you go into Botswana, and Aziz, you and I have talked about this. When you separate East Africa from, let's say, a Botswana, In a place like Botswana, you've got to work to see the game. You're in Makora boats, you're on foot, you're on, in some cases, horseback, you know, and you've got to work harder to see the game there, and you're up close, but it's less density, right? But then East Africa, it's the big migration. So can we talk about that as well?
Well, I mean, the migration, it's the wildebeest. We call it the wildebeest migration or the great wildebeest migration, but it's actually, it's a lot more animals than just the wildebeest. It's the wildebeest and zebras pretty much covering the entire migratory route, but we also have the Thompson gazelle that follows through, you have Grant's gazelle that follows through, and of course you've got an array of predators following this, as we'd say, meals on wheels. The migration well, yeah, that's it right there. But it's not, it doesn't happen over 2 months. It's a constant movement, day in, day out, month in, month out, year in, year out. They are always on the move. We're always talking about, oh, the river crossing. That's one aspect of the migration. The migration is constantly moving through 3 different parks. It's from the Ngorongoro Conservation Area, it's through the Serengeti, and into parts of the Masai Mara in Kenya. And when you put all those together, you're looking probably at about 30,000 square kilometers. That's the area that they're migrating through. And all they're looking for is water and grazing. So you've got this migration throughout the year. And what we're doing is when you've decided when you want to come on a safari, we of course would make every effort to try and we can't guarantee any sightings of wildlife because it is wildlife.
I gave the head wildebeest that radio you gave me. What are you talking about?
Exactly.
I asked them to cross when they got there.
We do that, but no, but seriously, we make every effort to try and show you the migration. Now, sometimes it's, you know, sometimes you'll see 10,000. Sometimes you are lucky enough to come across a herd of a few 100,000. Just depending. I mean, there are 1.4 million wildebeest and about 800,000 zebra. I mean, that's wall-to-wall wildlife, and you just can't tire of seeing it. If you, for instance, if you come out in February, it's the calving season. All the wildebeest and zebras are in southern Serengeti, between Ngorongoro and Serengeti. The soil is rich in calcium, hence the grazing is rich in calcium. And this is where mum is grazing and lactating a calcium-rich feed for newborn calves. So you come there in February and you park the vehicle and you're sitting there with 100,000 wildebeest, and a quarter or a third of them are just dropping babies all around you, and you're just watching all this birthing. The first one you see is like, oh my God. But then after about 15, you're almost like, can we move on now? But it's quite an incredible sighting. So there's a lot to experience through the migration, and then also to go in areas where the migration is not or has already been through. They've mowed down the grasses. We've got tall grasses certain times of the year. They've mowed it and eaten it all up, and then it's all short grass plains again. They've moved out of the area, and other different species will then come in because this has now been prepped for them by the migratory wildebeest and zebra.
And if you juxtapose that, and I took my video off on purpose to show you my profile picture. If you look closely, this is the Devil's Pool on the Zambian side of Victoria Falls. So literally these rock pools, and this is a client that did this, and I've done this with my wife. And actually, the joke that we did this on our honeymoon, is you come to this edge here and say, look, if ever it comes a time, just push. Really easy, done. That's it. So you've got specific seasons in Southern Africa. So for example, in places like Zambia, places like Botswana, places like South Africa, coming into Cape Town in November, December, it gets extremely hot. You know, Botswana, for example, in December is over 100 degrees. Zambia is same thing, over 100 degrees. Whereas in East Africa, you're straddling the equator. So your temperature swings, it's more a case of raining or not. So I put this picture up just in terms of that. And then it's also the type of wildlife, you know, so we talk about the migration, the wide variety. Let's talk about zebra, for example, okay? So in the northern part of Kenya, you've got Gravy's zebra. Then you've got Bushnell zebra as you head south. Then you've got a different species of zebra in South Africa. Then let's talk about even lion. You've got lions you mentioned, but the black maned lions, which I'm going to find a picture of, and even how they look are so different. They're bigger than the lions in East Africa. If you go into the northern part of Botswana, near the Selinda Spillway, for example, there's lions there that are adapted to hunting around water. I'm just finding a picture to put up to show you guys, to show the difference of it. But then you've also, of course, got Cape Town and whatnot. So in Southern Africa, it's also very much about timing, right? So for example, if you're going in a certain time of year, let's say May, in Cape Town, May is going to be reverse season. So May is essentially autumn. It's when the winelands are all changing color, the leaves are turning orange and red. You get into July, August, September, those months, it's the winter. It doesn't snow, but it is still much cooler. As you go further north, the warmer it gets. So a place like Kruger, for example, year round, you've got access there. A place like Botswana, probably only ideal starting in about April, when the temperature cools off, through when the delta floods or the water's down from Angola, and then heading into probably, October, and then November, the falls dry out, Botswana gets too hot, and then something else. But as Aziz is talking about in East Africa, you've got different seasons of animal behavior versus temperature behavior. So that's something to also think about as well. Anybody else, and I got the chat box open there. If you guys have any comments or questions, please feel free to pop them in there as well. But I would love to have people share some stories if you've been. What are some things that you've experienced, and maybe a crazy story of your own that you can share with?
Hey, Ashish.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Hey, it's Karen. So I love Safari, as you know, and Safari is my happy place. And during this COVID-19, all I've been dreaming about is, getting back to Africa on Safari. I just gotta go there in my mind. And, I have all kinds of personal experiences and personal stories, but I think the main thing about Safari for me is just the personal. I mean, everybody who goes sees something unique. Everybody comes back with their own story. People go off and I know they're going to come back and see something and experience something that I never saw. And, I can share with them what I saw, and that was my story. And it was just so amazing and unique. And I love when we get back to the lodge at night and everybody shares all of their stories. So, I mean, just nothing cookie cutter about Safari, nothing Animal Kingdom, Disney World here about Safari. It's just all amazing, from, the wild dogs to the stampeding elephants to the, leopard that popped up 4 feet from us in the middle of the night, just, startled us until we all squeaked a little bit. But it's just so amazing. And it's all about the personal. I love to hear people's personal experiences.
Well, and I popped this picture up hoping to cultivate this, and not because I'm narcissistic. It's not at all that. It's more so just be able to share this with you. So this was taken in November. I was in Kenya in November, and so the gentleman on the right hand side is Ian Craig. Ian is I guess you would call him, Aziz, would you call him the godfather of conservation for rhino, or how would you define Ian Craig?
Yeah. I would say the godfather, absolutely.
Yeah. So, I've known this man since I was 15 years old. Those of you who've watched Out of Africa, for example, that yellow biplane that's in the movie is his family's biplane. So my father knew him, knew his family, knew Anna Mertz. To show you how connected he is, his daughter is Prince William's ex-girlfriend. He's the reason that William and Kate are together. He helped get them engaged in Lewa. And I've never met him, but I followed him. My parents met him, knew Anna Mertz. I think Aziz, you knew them as well, obviously, when you were there. And so it's not very often, and this is what Karen's talking about, it's not very often this happens. So we were driving through Lewa, this is in November, and that black lab was in the back of that vehicle you see there. And he's the only person that has a black lab. And if you've ever seen a Land Cruiser do a U-turn, these vehicles have the most horrible turning radiuses you can ever imagine. And this vehicle turned a U-turn when we went after this thing like a cheetah chasing a gazelle. And we went after him, stopped him. And, the safari experience isn't always about animals. It's not always about that. I was able to walk up to this man and say, and he was knighted by the Queen in 2016. I was able to go up to him and say, Sir Craig, you don't know me. You know my parents, you know my family, you don't know me. I followed you since I was 15 years old, and I believe in conservation because of you. You're one of my heroes in life. And I saw you and I turned around because I wanted you to hear that. The man started crying because I told him that. And it was absolutely amazing, the fact that he was going back to his manor to go get his computer. And the fact that I turned around to go tell him that. And that's what Aziz is talking about, what Karen's talking about, is that a safari experience doesn't always mean, oh, I saw the big five or I saw the animals. It's something that's not planned, that shows up. And so this was where that came in. And Aziz, you have one like this too. You've had a story where you got to actually experience that. And I'm trying to think which one it was, but you have several of these. But any one of those that you want to share that was just one of those moments that just reinforced why we do what we do?
Well, I was in one of these smaller parks that's not frequently visited because it doesn't have much of an infrastructure, called Mkomazi, which straddles the border with Kenya and Tsavo in Kenya. And I had gone there camping on my own, and it's always going to be very, it's always been my memory. It's engraved in my memory. But it was a pretty sad and moving experience. I've never experienced that in my life again. But we were out in a game drive, and I think it's about 2,500 square kilometers, the area of the park. And I think we were the only 3 or 4 people. It was my little group of friends that were out there camping. So we have this entire reserve pretty much to ourselves. On one end of it, we have someone by the name of Tony Fitzjohn, and he's doing wild dog and rhino conservation in Mkomazi. He used to work with the Adamsons in northern Kenya in the days gone by. And so I've met him a few times at little party or dinner parties in Arusha. Didn't know him very well, but I know he's in the park, and I thought, okay, well, maybe we'll swing by and just say hello. But when we were out in the morning game drive, I noticed this one solitary elephant kind of standing underneath a tree, and it wasn't blazing hot because the sun had just come up. So I'm like, why is this elephant standing right, it's almost like leaning against a tree. It was quite a distance away. I mean, they will do that at midday when the sun is blazing, to be in the shade to get out of the sun. So we drove and we carried on driving. We came back about an hour later, or 2 hours later, headed back to where we had set up our tents. And this elephant had actually moved away from the tree, which was probably about 300-400 meters away, and it moved closer to the road. And so immediately stopped, turned off the vehicle, and sat quietly and watched this elephant. And then it started to wobble. And it was really, it was almost like it was drunk, or something was amiss, and all of a sudden the elephant falls on its forehead, and it was awful to see this. But but there you go. This is the wild. This is what's happening. I mean, and we actually sat there and watched within minutes. It seems in my memory like it was days, but it was probably a few minutes, and this elephant just collapsed in front of us, and you could hear its last breath. And it was just, it just completely took everything out of us. And when we noticed that this elephant had died, I immediately turned the vehicle around and headed to Fitzjohn, because he's in charge of conservation in the area. And I was like, I need to tell him what's happened. So I rushed over to his place, and he has a little, single or two-seater single engine aircraft for aerial looking, just looking over the park for poachers or cattle that are not allowed to be in, etc. So he's like, come on, Aziz, come along with me and show me in which area you saw this. And we flew over within 5 or 10 minutes. What had taken me an hour to drive, we were there in 5 or 10 minutes, landed on the road, and got the vets to drive out, and they did a whole sort of autopsy on the elephant to check had it been poisoned or maybe had an arrowhead from poaching. But it wasn't that. It was just it had died, unfortunately, of natural causes. But it's like everything you experience in safari, and you don't know what it is. It's a birthing. It's a kill. It's a predator taking down its prey. Once I was in a vehicle with 6 ladies. It was a group of ladies who'd come out in safari, and I went along as their guide, and we were watching a herd of zebra, and all of a sudden you see this pride I think there were 15 or 20 strong female lions walking. I mean, but nonchalant. It was like, you know, they were like this gang. They were not crouching. They just waltzed into this herd of zebra, and like, okay, something's going to happen here. Let's wait. So we waited about 15 minutes, and eventually they made it to the zebra herd, and like without any, I mean, they signaled each other. They know their signals, and within a second, you had 3 or 4 groups break out from this one particular pride, and they all started making kills. Like immediately, you didn't know where to look. I mean, you know, it's not something you experience on very often. But this was this very large pride of lionesses. And I think they brought down that day 5 to 6 zebra. But it was, you know, it was a bit much to watch. I mean, some of the ladies were like, okay, can we move? Can we go somewhere else? Because this is a really, really difficult to watch. Because we had, you know, we almost had killings going down wholesale, which doesn't really normally happen. So you never know. You never know what your day will bring on a safari. It could be the smallest. It could be the smallest thing. It could be an insect. It could be a dung beetle. And you know, you're out looking for animals, and sometimes that does happen. That you can drive for half an hour, and you're looking, and these animals, they're watching us, but we're not seeing them sometimes. And so as not for the clients to get like, okay, you know, we're all the way out here from the States, and where are all the animals? You know, we haven't seen anything for an hour, and it does happen sometimes. But then the guides know to keep you enthralled, and will show you the littlest of things, just to keep you upbeat and involved. And then you realize, oh, yeah, even the little things in Africa are interesting.
Well, I wanted to stop. I'm going to pop a picture up here, and I wanted to stop and see if anybody had anything they wanted to share, questions or anything. And I popped this picture up just because I love this picture. One of my favorite experiences in Cape Town is actually going around by sidecar. These are Russian-built Urals. These are not the M71s after World War II, but the replicas of the motorcycles that were there. These were all, it's a company that if you guys have been to China, there are these sidecars tours that are done in Beijing and Shanghai. They've since moved them out now of China, and there's only 3 places in the world you can do this now. Cape Town, Marrakesh, and actually, sorry, 2. The third used to be Mendoza. So now it's only in Africa. So you can do it in Marrakesh, and this one, which is on a road called Chapman's Peak, which I'll talk about in a second. But anybody have anything they wanna share, any comments or anything like that they'd love to be able to talk about here, anything like that? I'll stop for a second.
I can unmute you. You may have to unmute yourself to speak. You can do that in the bottom left corner or on your screen, or you can just wave your hand and I'll unmute you. Okay. No one's speaking up.
Ashish, I think that looks fabulous. I have not been to South Africa, and it is very high on my list. And I think that sidecar looks like so much fun.
Oh, you're muted, Ashish. You're muted.
There we go. So
Yeah.
is it's the only way that I want to go when I do this. You know, I've done this more times than I can count. And we did it in Marrakesh. My kids actually were in the sidecar. I was behind the driver. And in Marrakesh, we found a little stadium inside the walled city where Jimi Hendrix performed at one point. Now, I'm a classic rock guy, so this was it. But in Cape Town, we went here. This road here, Chapman's Peak. I know, Aziz, do you know the story of BMW, Mercedes, and Chapman's Peak? Have you heard this story?
No.
Okay. So this is in the 90s. This is actually quite funny. So Mercedes-Benz wanted to test the safety of their car. So they actually drove one of their cars off this cliff and just rolled it down the cliff and said, you know, Mercedes-Benz, the safest car ever built. So BMW, not to be outdone, and this is a very windy road that goes like this with a cliff on one side and a rock side on the other side, and said BMW holds the Benz, B-E-N-Z, not D-S. So you can imagine how long it took for the lawsuit to show up between the two. But that became the huge thing, and this road became famous. It's one of the most scenic drives, but this is part of it. You do sundowners in this as well. So again, back to what we're saying, that the experience doesn't have to be just, okay, let me see animals. It's got to be more than that. I'll tell you guys this, that a few years back, I think it was 2014, maybe 13. I was at a luncheon and I got to meet Nelson Mandela's private chef. And so she was writing a book. She obviously doesn't speak English, but she was writing a book. And the book was based really on this experience of, just what these dishes represented. So there's a lot of Indian dishes that were there, a lot of different street food dishes, and every dish represented a period of incarceration. So off these sidecars, there's a tour that we do now that actually is a street food tour in Cape Town, where every single dish tells a story about anti-apartheid. It remains to be seen whether the tour will still be done after this period, because it was done before, obviously, but everything comes from there. So I think that was something really, really key in terms of that.
I'm going to step in and talk about food a little, because those who haven't been to Africa have this, sometimes may have this impression that we don't have very much of food going around. Just to share with you that when you are out in safari, be it a cultural safari, be it a wildlife safari, anywhere in Africa, the food is absolutely amazing. I mean, I've had clients come out and they've got bags full of granola bars and they think, okay, we're going to be on safari. There's probably not going to be much food. They get all these snacks out, these unhealthy snacks all the way from the States. And within a day or two, they've chucked them all away because the food is unbelievable. It's all freshly prepared. Most of it is homegrown. Your breakfast buffet, looks amazing. Your lunches, your dinners, your packed lunches. That's another thing we're doing these days. We tend to do a lot of full day game drives, so that you're not heading out to an area only to drive back an hour and a half to get back for a hot meal. So what we tend to do is we leave after an early breakfast and we carry lunch in the vehicle. So we've introduced a hamper. We used to, like most of the other companies, have lunch boxes, which is cardboard boxes with a lot of wrapping and a lot of plastic and a lot of waste. And so we opted to do something a bit more environmental friendlier and opted for picnic hampers. So you have this fantastic meal served in little Tupperwares. You've got plates and cutlery. We've got a Maasai blanket. We've got tables and chairs all fold up in the back of the vehicle. So it's like, the guide will be driving around. You're like, oh, I'm kind of hungry now. The kids are, or the adult's hungry. And you'll find a nice spot, pull out the tables, lay the table, pull out the chairs. You get to sit in the middle of nowhere and enjoy this fabulous picnic lunch that is prepared at your hotel, lodge, or camp. But the food is yeah. I mean, it could be a culinary experience safari too. We don't sell it that way. We don't advertise it that way. But yeah, wildlife, people, culture, and I would I'd have to throw in their food.
Well, you mentioned the key word, which is modes of transportation, right? We were talking about that earlier, and there's a comment here about different boats and whatnot. So I wanted to share with everybody the craziest mode of transportation. So if you humor me for a second, I just want to get this image up because I wanted to share this because I thought it was just such an amazing image in terms of for people to see. Because I think, when you look at Southern Africa, this image represents probably the key difference right there. This is what the difference is, right? So you got to choose between density of herds, and then you got to choose between that in Botswana with the Delta. So, and I think that's the key thing. And, a lot of times we get asked, well, which one's better? Well, there is no better. It's which one have you done or not done? And you can combine the two very easily because there's flights through Victoria Falls to get there. But this is a type of experience, and it's not for everybody, obviously. But, for those who really want to get into it, that's an example. You can even go, of course, on little dugout Mokoro boats and bicycles, but the horseback is something really key. A couple of places in Africa, Kenya has it, Botswana has it, South Africa has it, have these things, and I'll find a picture to show you guys, called hides. So picture a little dugout that's pit into the ground. It's about probably 3 feet down into the ground with a little gun slit in the front, and you're a photographer looking up. And there's an experience like that. So, and we have places like that in East Africa too, as well as Southern Africa. And Aziz, if you want to talk about that in terms of those kinds of experiences, I'm going to find this picture to show everybody while you're doing that.
I mean, most of the transportation tends to be in a 4x4 all-terrain vehicle. A few areas tend to also offer walking safaris, and these are not physically exerting long hikes or anything. They're short walks to again look at the smaller things in the African nature. We also have, like you said, we have boats, either canoes or makoros. Makoros tend to be in East Africa. We offer canoe safaris on Lake Manyara and Arusha National Park. We also have scenic flights, so you can charter an aircraft, probably a Cessna, and do a scenic flight over the Serengeti, over Kilimanjaro, or over Mount Meru. We also have the balloon safari, which is quite a magical experience. It tends to be a tad bit hefty on pricing, but it is a once in a lifetime experience. I know you have balloon trips in the States, probably over Napa Valley and areas like that, looking at vineyards. But it's quite the other. I've done balloon both in East Africa and in Europe. Actually, did a balloon ride with my family once it was in France. Very, very different experience, because there you go. Because in East Africa, you know, it's the whole event it's pretty much half a day. You would have dinner, and then you'd have a pre-flight briefing after dinner by the staff of the balloon company, and then they will then say, okay, we'll be here at 4:35 a.m. So yes, it is a very early wake-up call. But I always try and explain to my guests that, you know, when you get to wake up at 4:30 to have a quick cup of coffee, and then jump into a 4x4 and drive out for an hour to the launch area of the balloon, you've just had a night game drive, because the amount of wildlife you're seeing between 5 and 6 with the headlights of the Land Rover, Land Cruiser driving to the launch site is that already in itself, because it's pitch dark all around you, and you just got this little alleyway of light in front of you that you're looking down, and there's so much stuff on the road. There tends to be a lot more animals on the road at night, because even if it's not a paved road, even if it's just a dirt road, the dirt road or a paved road will hold the heat of the sun of the day for a longer period of the night. And so a lot of the animals will come out and actually lay on the road for warmth, because the evenings can get quite cold. Not North American and Northern Hemisphere cold, but for us Africans cold. And then you come out to this launch area, and there's a couple of people, there's a truck, and then there's balloon laid out. And then they start to inflate at this loud blaring gas burner. And you're all standing there cuddled up and huddled and, you know, dressed up warm, because it is a bit chilly. And then you load up into this basket, and then you have this silent, you know, once you've lifted up, the gas burner goes off, and then you're floating just across the Serengeti Plains, and the pilot ensures that he's always twisting the balloon around, the basket around, so that everyone can have the frontal view or the back view or whatever. And then your flight, depending on winds and weather, could be 45 minutes to an hour. Landings also differ, and to be very honest, some landings are absolutely amazing. It's just a little bump and you stop. Sometimes if winds are stronger, you tend to be dragged for 50 meters. But then you're in the middle of nowhere, you've landed the balloon, or the pilot's landed the balloon, you jump out of the basket, and there's this champagne breakfast, again in the middle of nowhere. So you have your champagne breakfast, and it's from the champagne breakfast that your guide, my guides, will come and pick you up, and then you carry on with your game driving day. And that's probably about 10:30. So you've done a 5-hour excursion. The balloon safari is an hour, but everything else that's added to the front end of it, the night game drive to the balloon launch site, the breakfast experience in the middle of nowhere, all of that is just magical.
Well, and you compare that, let's say, and again, contrast it with something like the Hide, this is in a place in Botswana called the Tuli Block. And this is that dugout that you're just there and you're literally at ground level and the elephants and whatever else you can think of is walking right past you. This is an example, but it's the photography aspect of it. So again, it's not any one thing that we go. I wanted to just and Beverly, we're at the top of the hour. Can we keep going for a little bit, or do we want to wrap it up? What would everybody prefer?
Well, that's up to our guest here. Does anybody have any preference? If you need to sign off, we can. You can give us a message here, or a thumbs up, or unmute yourself and talk.
No one has any questions?
I did have one question, Aziz. Are binoculars included or supplied, or do you need to bring your own?
Always advisable to bring your own binoculars. Wherever you go on safari, always carry your own binoculars. The guides have binoculars which they can pass back to you so you can borrow them, but there's nothing like having your own binoculars and we're all looking at the same thing at the same time. Because when you start passing one bit of equipment around, you could lose a sighting. Because it's not always that the sighting is right by the vehicle. Sometimes it's a distance away. The guide spots a leopard 500 meters away in a tree and he's looking with his binoculars, and so get out your binoculars, look at 11 o'clock at the acacia tree on the third branch to the left, and you'll see a leopard. Now, if you're going to share binoculars, that leopard could get up and get off the tree because they can be a bit skittish, even if you're that far away. So then, part of the group might miss out. So it's always good to have your own equipment, and binoculars are essential.
Yeah, and I was going to add to that, yeah, I mean, and even in Southern Africa, for example, there's binoculars in the vehicles, just like Aziz is saying, in East Africa as well. I learned this because I have astigmatism in one eye. And when you have binoculars that come in, they don't always work. For example, some binoculars are polarized, some are not. So for example, in November, we actually delivered anti-poaching equipment up to the communities up in the northern part of Kenya. And we were up there, we were talking about binoculars. They needed specifically 42 times binoculars, but they needed thermal imaging binoculars. So we delivered that. There's other binoculars where they need polarized lenses, and everybody's obviously your eye structure, your facial structure, it's different. And as much as these companies invest in the binoculars, I wish they would invest in flexible nose bridges. Not just the little nub, but a more flexible nose bridge to get a better fit, because I mean it's amazing in terms of what they can do. I thought it sounds like, and Beverly, it sounds like we can keep going for a few more minutes from what everybody is saying, if that's okay.
If you all would like to, give me a nod, give me a shake.
Okay. So I thought we could just talk about accommodations and just show some different types of accommodations. When we say tented camp, and oftentimes the connotation is, well, I'm pitching a tent, I'm going to have a bed, and I'm going to have that. Those are called glamping experiences. We can do that too. But when we say tented experiences, we're not talking quite about that. I mean, we have some tents that put a Four Seasons to shame. Aziz, do you want to talk about the camping experience and what that's about? And I'll pull up some pictures of it.
If you go camping with me privately, you'll end up in a little pup tent and crawl into it, and you'll have a 1-inch mattress and a sleeping bag. Quite a great experience, actually, safari like that. But that's not what we offer. I've tried to convince Ashish to offer those kind of trips, but he's just not interested. No, I mean, your tented camps all over Africa, Southern and Eastern Africa, are just unbelievable. I mean, it's incredible what designs and amenities that they have managed to put into 4 canvas walls. And in the middle of nowhere. That's another thing. Picture a tent with a glass front. So you've got 3 walls of canvas around you. You've got this gorgeous king-size bed with fluffy down pillows and quilt, and a little remote control to open up this glass frontage. That's the entire front of your whole tent, which is en suite with a little living room and, of course, a shower, not just a shower. You have an indoor shower, you have a bathtub, you have an outdoor shower. Just so you have a choice of what kind of shower or bath you'd like to have. Some of the tented camps, you might even have a little plunge pool on your deck. So you've had enough of game drive, which can happen after 10 days of bouncing around. You're like, we'd like to enjoy the tranquility of camp. And the camps are so gorgeous that I want to do that every once in a while. And so you've had your lunch and you have your afternoon in your tent to read your book or go through the photographs on your camera, and sort of, just maybe lie in the plunge pool. You've got a little phone in your room. You can call in room service and you're in the middle of nowhere. It's quite incredible, really. I mean, the comfort levels are, but nothing has been spared. They give you it all.
You're muted, Ashish.
Sorry. Yeah. There, and that's exactly it in terms of it. And this is a question about. This is a good question about security, in terms of in terms of it. So I'm going to show you a couple of different pictures of. I showed you a picture of a camp in Serengeti. I'm going to show you some pictures of Singita as well in Sabi Sands area, so you get an example of what that looks like as well, what ebony is, and the motif that's there. But I want to talk about security. And Aziz, can we talk about that real quick in terms of security and because this is not fenced in, but sometimes it can be a bit scary, in terms of that, in terms of animals coming right in and whatnot, and is it an issue? So can you talk to everybody about that?
If you're staying at a lodge, and the lodges tend to be about 50 to 65 roomed lodges, you tend to be within an enclosed area of a building. So movement between your rooms and the reception or the dining area or the lounge area or the bar is in a secure area. When you stay in a tented camp, that's the rule at a tented camp is during the day. And I wonder why this is, but during the day you can freely walk, and that's probably because you can see better during the day. But you can freely walk from your tent 200, 300, 400 meters to the main lounge area, dining area. In the evenings, you have flashlights in your tents, and if you want to head out for dinner, you are not permitted to walk off on your own. So you have Maasai warriors. Maasai is the local tribes, which are found both in Kenya and Tanzania. They're armed with spears and they have their flashlight and they have a huge dagger attached to their little belt. And so you come out to the deck of your tent and just flash your flashlight, and someone will come to your tent to escort you to the dining area. And so you are secure that way. And it's happened even with me. I'm like, oh no, I can do it. And they're like, no, you're not allowed. I'm like, I'm born here. I do it all the time. They're like, it doesn't matter. Rules are rules. So I have to do the same thing. And, I'm sort of following the Maasai. And, sometimes he'll stop and he's like, okay, quiet. And you have a buffalo walk by in the middle of the night. This is like 7, 8 o'clock in the evening. You're on your way to dinner, but you're still experiencing wildlife. Touch wood, we've never had any. And when I talk about not just myself, I'm talking about our whole industry. We haven't had any issues at tented camps of any wildlife problems. I think we should worry more about security when we're in our various cities that we reside in, not in Africa in the wild. That's probably one of the safest places to be.
And I wanted to share with everybody, I'm going to share with you in a second, just kind of what he's talking about. So, I showed you the experience of what it looks like in parts of Tanzania and parts of that. This is a place that a lot of people will know is Singita ebony, which is in Sabi Sands. And this is kind of a rough idea of the motif, the European flavor that comes through. Singita, we call these the twin properties. There's actually 4 properties in Kruger. There's Sweni, there's Lebombo, there's Boulders, and there's Ebony. And Boulders and Ebony are the twin properties. So you could see that the experience itself is very, very different in terms of that. So Aziz, we talked about the experience. We have some people that have been to East Africa that are on the call that are obviously trying to compare the experience between South Africa and Southern Africa versus East Africa and looking at that. So we talked about the migration, but can you talk about the vehicles and just what an all-day game drive looks like? And then I'll juxtapose that with what an experience in Sabi Sands, let's say at a Singita, for example, would look like.
When you're out in safari, there's 2 types of vehicles that you'll encounter. You have the closed up Jeeps that Ashish had put up earlier. those tend to be the vehicles that we use because we are driving from different areas so a vehicle like in my background, we're driving through larger areas and from one area to another. You could not do that in an open vehicle. If you do, part of a flying package would mean that you're with my guide or our guides for part of your safari. You'd be in a closed vehicle like that, where you're allocated a window seat. It's a maximum of 6 persons in a vehicle, all from one group. And if you're a couple, you'll have this large 6-seater Land Cruiser to yourself. You'd either have 1 roof hatch or 3 roof hatches on top, but everyone has access to a game viewing and photography hatch, and of course a window. And your guide up front also has his own roof hatch. So if you're watching game, he can also stand up and be at the same level with you, as opposed to talking to your feet. He'll be up there talking to you face to face. If you do a little bit of a mix with a flying package and do a game package in one of the camps, they tend to use open vehicles because they're doing shorter distances. Vehicles that are stationed in a tented camp will probably drive 50 kilometers or 100 in a day, 150 in a day. Whereas with us, we tend to be driving longer distances.
And I'll juxtapose that and just kind of show you. So let's take a Sangita, for example. So you saw the vehicles earlier. This is what a Sangita vehicle would look like. So there's no roof on the vehicle. So you see the difference in the vehicle behind Aziz. Oh, there we go. Oops. So you got the distance in the vehicle, you know, the vehicle behind Aziz, that you see what our vehicles look like. And then this is what a vehicle in Sangita looks like. You know, in terms of, it's so very open. You've got a ranger that sits up here in terms of it. And then you've got, obviously got people here as well. It depends on where you are. But this is kind of that kind of experience. Then you've also got the bedding experience in terms of that. We talked about the safety experience, and you saw a picture of the bedding. Aziz, you were talking about the fact that, you know, they don't spare any expense when it comes to the bed. In terms of the room itself, we talk about the fact, and we joke about the fact that this puts a Four Seasons to shame in terms of it. Can you talk about just what the room is like on the inside?
I mean, you know, depend. They're all quite differently decorated. Some have a more European flair, and most of the camps tend to lend a more African flavor with decor. But you know, most of these tented accommodations tend to be either very comfortable twin beds, or with mosquito netting, so you're completely protected from any mosquitoes that you may encounter. You've got a little living or sitting area. You probably have a mini bar stuck in the back, plenty of closet space. Like I said, a choice of an indoor, outdoor shower, a sunken bath or a plunge pool out in the front. Sometimes single basin, sometimes a double basin in the bathroom, and sometimes also 2 toilets. Yeah, there's sometimes even 2 toilets within one tent. So yeah, I mean, you know, gorgeous rugs. I mean, you could pretty much live in one of those tents and not have to leave, and probably don't want to once you've experienced it.
So I have to tell you this funny story. And the picture you're seeing right now, this is actually, I showed you a picture earlier of Mwiba camp, which is in the lower Serengeti, in terms of what that experience. This is Singita Ebony, and this is what the rooms look like there. So the motif, you can see there's a lot of homage paid to the heritage and to the location. I guess the one thing that every country in Africa, Safari Africa, has in common is that the best camps are the ones where you don't walk in and think that you're walking into a hotel in, no offense, Aziz, Amsterdam, or London or New York. You actually know where you are, right? So that's part of it as well. But this is kind of what that experience is like. You can see that there's homage paid to this in terms of the experience. But that's the one thing that every part of Safari Africa has in common in terms of that. And the experiences, just as Aziz said, the experiences really vary based on what you're into. So for example, if you're into pure walking safaris, there are places in Africa for that. If you're into a safari where you want to be away from crowds, we know how to do that. You know, there's experiences that are there as well. And really what it comes down to when it looks at accommodations, and we say this to everybody as well, is, you don't have to worry about roughing it on Safari if you're doing it in different places. I think it's more so that when you're looking at accommodations, it's what does a perfect place feel like to you? Not what does it look like, but what does it feel like? There are certain, for example, we have a guest who came to, and Aziz remembers this guest, who was a germaphobe. Absolutely had to have liters and liters of soap, that had to be. So we had to have soap shipped out to different properties for him because he just had to shower and soap, and that was the main thing. So each place is different. We don't judge. We can accommodate. We're going to wrap it up. I just wanted to say thank you to everybody. Aziz, any final thoughts to share with everybody? And then Beverly, I'll hand it back over to you.
Come and experience a dream safari. Africa awaits. We'll share it with you. So much.
This is Jean. I just wanted to say thank you for doing this presentation for us. It was enjoyable listening to your stories, and I wanted to also shout out to my clients. Thank you for coming on board, and I hope to see you all soon. Thanks again.
This has been just fabulous. Thank you both so much. I could listen to these stories for days and days. So maybe we will have to do this again. And thank you both, all of our clients who have come in and listened and participated, and our helpers. Lee, you've done a marvelous job administering all of our technology here. And so thank you all again. I hope you all have a wonderful night. Some of us are a little further along on that evening than others, aren't you, Aziz? We appreciate you staying up late for us.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you all very much.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night to everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night. Take care.